Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. What Donald Trump and his administration started, the people of Minneapolis have finished. Donald Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, announcing today that the deployment of thousands of federal agents in Minneapolis is coming to an end. That announcement comes after more than 2 months in which Minneapolis and the entire country witnessed scenes of brutality by federal agents on the streets of an American city, and including the shootings of 3 people, including the killing of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. American people also witnessed an American city rising up in protest, inspiring a nationwide outcry and backlash to Donald Trump bigger than anything else he has endured in his second term as president. As with anything Donald Trump or his administration says, the news of a drawdown is being taken with a grain of salt by many in Minneapolis. The president of the Minneapolis City Council had this to say, quote, "I will believe it when I see it," end quote. But other officials are sounding a little more optimistic that the brutal federal presence may actually be coming to an end. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said this in a statement, quote, "They thought they could break us, but a love for our neighbors and a resolve to endure can outlast an occupation. These patriots of Minneapolis are showing that it's not just about resistance. Standing with our neighbors is deeply American." And here's Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz.
Minnesotans never wavered. And for that, I will be forever grateful. I think it's probably safe to say the rest of the country will be forever grateful because they showed what it means to stand up for what's right, to stand up for the true principles of this country, to stand with the Constitution, and to stand with human decency. And so I want to note that the announcement today by Mr. Homan, we are cautiously optimistic, as we've said, and that this surge of untrained, aggressive federal agents are going to leave Minnesota.
As the governor noted, there are the acts of bravery by the people of Minneapolis, including the tens of thousands of people who went out to protest day after day in bitter cold temperatures, have inspired a nationwide movement. Signs of it are everywhere in recent weeks.
We have a constitution, and it allows us to freedom of the press and freedom of speech, protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, and makes it that we have to, have probable cause to be pulled over. And what's happening in Minnesota is wrong.
There should be an appeal to our better angels to look after one another and to recognize what's happening. We're being divided.
We're sitting here talking about movies while an illegal army is being mounted against U.S. citizens.
The backlash shows up in polls as well. A new survey by the Associated Press shows that sizable majorities of the American people think Donald Trump has gone too far, that he's overreached. 62% of all Americans think he has gone too far by sending federal agents into American cities. Just 36% approve of the way that Donald Trump is doing his job overall. Signs of a potential retreat by Donald Trump in the face of massive national backlash that started with the people of Minneapolis is where we start today. Minnesota State Senator Erin Maye Quade is here. She is today in Washington, D.C., with more than 50 Minnesotans demanding no additional funding for ICE or CBP. Also joining us, former DHS Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's first term as president, Miles Taylor's here, and Puck News senior political columnist, national affairs analyst John Heilman is here. Madam Senator, I start with you. First, your reaction to news of the surge ending, which, of course, we should say doesn't mean that all ICE agents and all ICE activity ceases, but that the surge of federal agents, at least in terms of what they're saying, is over.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that Minnesotans will feel relief when we see conditions on the ground change. The last time Tom Homan announced a drawdown in Apple Valley, where I live and I serve in the suburbs, we saw an intentional targeting of children. It was at daycares, it was at schools, it was at bus stops. And so for a lot of us hearing this today, we're worried that another announcement of a drawdown, where are they going to go, what are they going to do until they leave, if they leave. So I think cautiously optimistic might be too much. I think believe it when I see it is closer to what a lot of Minnesotans are feeling. But we will stand in the gap forever for our neighbors. And hopefully today is the day that we can say this started to end.
Senator, can you tell us what it is like? Because I feel like when we were all there, when all the news organizations were there, we had eyes on the ground. We had lots of crews on all the street corners. And it is not lost on me that a lot of that activity is ongoing. So can you just tell us what it's like right now?
Yeah, it's almost indescribable what is happening on the ground because it looks different in every part of the state. There are tens of thousands of Minnesotans, yes, out constitutionally observing. There's even more providing rides, hiding families, delivering food, buying groceries, taking to medical appointments. But what really happens is you have ICE, they idle outside of apartment buildings. They idle outside of bus stops. They go onto school property. They, drive around recklessly through neighborhoods. They go into entire restaurants and try to detain workers. They harass people who are just driving, their kid to swim lessons. It is indescribable how ever present they are in our state, in every community, and how dangerously they act. And you could just be going about your daily life and encounter them. And that has not changed. Like today, I can tell you that is still happening. I had to leave my phone in another room to do this interview because I'm still getting all the messages of where they are, just in my own community, not in the entire state. So on the ground, it is still very hellish, and it is very, very difficult. And we want to make sure that our neighbors stay safe, and we will not breathe out until we actually see them leave, because right now they have not left.
What is their explanation for why they need to be in schools, preschools, high schools, middle schools?
There is no explanation. There is no reason for it. And if you ask my Republican colleagues in Minnesota, they will say ICE is getting out the worst of the worst. And what we have seen is that they're actually targeting the best of the best. With Renee Good, Alex Preddy, the untold number of observers that have been detained, harassed, terrorized, the school board members that they've terrorized, the principals that they've terrorized, the children that they've taken. There is no excuse. But I do want everyone to know that what is happening in Minnesota right now with federal agents is the armed version of what the Trump administration has been doing since day one, which is putting us under siege. They have frozen federal funding for schools. They've ripped away health care and food stamps, targeted rural hospitals, and LIHEAP dollars, targeted higher education. I mean, our child care funding, it goes on and on. The ICE agents and CBP, that is the armed version of what the Trump administration has been doing all along. And it's just more visible, but it has been a siege since day one.
What is it about the people of Minneapolis that changed the story? I mean, to your point, it is this multi-layered siege that they set out to engage in Los Angeles and Chicago, in Minneapolis, but they got to, and I'm not saying that people didn't resist in Los Angeles and Chicago, but people of Minneapolis have handled this in a way that people around the world are talking about and covering.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this. One, I'm a sixth-generation Minnesotan, so I will just say I think Minnesota is the best state in the nation, and we are very special and unique. We have the highest rates of volunteerism and the highest rates of voting. We are a very civically engaged state. We're a very diverse, multicultural, multi-generational, inclusive state where we really do love our neighbors. And I think that irks Republicans. I think they don't like that we don't just say we love our neighbors. We actually do love our neighbors. I think it irks them that we are what democracy looks like in action. And so I think that targeting was part of that. But I also think Minnesota is just such a special place, the way that we actually love and care for one another. And this should never go to any other state. Minnesotans want this to end in our state, yes, but not go anywhere else. And it should be noted that, yes, they targeted, Chicago and Illinois and L.A., Maine a little bit. But what they had in Minnesota were 3,000 federal agents. That was more agents than the 10 largest police departments combined in the state of Minnesota. And so what happened in Minnesota was very, very unique. And that is why you saw that very, very unique response, is because of the militarization of our streets, frankly.
I want to bring in Miles and John Heilman. Miles Taylor, you are sort of our only sort of living witness into what Donald Trump does when he's back on his heels. And this retreat from Minneapolis is one such example. I mean, often, like a bad storm, retreats, gather strength, and sort of attacks somewhere else. What is your sense of what this retreat means?
Yeah, I think that retreat is maybe even a word that gives people too much comfort. I really think this is a reset, and I want to be optimistic about it. I mean, I think the bravery of the people of Minnesota allowed this to happen, but we cannot be complacent. You remember, Nicole, that famous scene in Star Wars when Luke Skywalker's in the Millennium Falcon and he shoots a TIE fighter, and Han Solo turns to him and he says, "Great kid, don't get cocky." They still have to take out the Death Star. And this is one of those moments. We can't be complacent about what happened here. Yes, the people of Minnesota put the Trump administration back on its heels, but Donald Trump will not give this up. Now, I imagine there's some infighting between people like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, who have very different views about this. But let's not forget, we were on the cusp of the president of the United States invoking the Insurrection Act. It didn't happen because Trump did not like how it was playing on television. Mark my words, he will try to foment the circumstances for it to play better for him. And that's probably what they are doing right now at the White House, looking at what states they could go to next, looking at what circumstances they could create that would, create a better optic for the president. And they're going to go after it again. Remember, just days ago, Trump's immigration chiefs testified before Congress that their mandate from the president was a mass deportation plan. They are not revising the underlying policy here. They're just stepping back from one state where it didn't go well.
John Heilman, that didn't happen by accident. I mean, Mayor Frey and Tim Walz and the senator were communicating to their constituents to not take the bait, to not give Donald Trump that theater to sort of produce what he wanted to produce. That was very deliberate, that all the protests were peaceful, even in the wake of these two horrific killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy.
Yeah, and Nicole, I agree with everything Miles just said a second ago. I don't think that, I think it's absolutely appropriate for people to breathe a sigh of relief, particularly the people in Minneapolis, but and around the country. I mean, everybody wanted that nightmare to end, and obviously trust but verify. We'll make sure that we'll keep watching to make sure that they actually are doing what they say they're going to do. I do think that it's all dress rehearsal. There's been this upward movement from, as we go through this, I count it every time I feel like I talk about this, but from Los Angeles to Washington to Chicago to Minneapolis, there's just been an increase, and importantly, an increase in the number of agents, federal agents on the street, but also importantly, a realization, you'll remember back in Los Angeles, we were all freaking out about the fact that, and rightly so, that Donald Trump had deployed some Marines to Los Angeles, and that was unconstitutional or illegal, violating posse comitatus. I think that one of the things that happened over the course of that time was that Trump realized that the military might be just too professional for him to carry out what he wants to get done in these cities, both in terms of the deportation agenda, but also as a dress rehearsal for what might happen at the polls in November. And there was a realization as he went through these various trial runs, these dress rehearsals, that ICE was the better agent for him than the U.S. military. Who knows? Somebody who actually is a senior ranking person in the military might stand up at some point and say, sorry, we're not going to do this, President Trump, because it violates posse comitatus, because it's not in keeping with our mission and with our oath to the Constitution. No one in ICE is going to say that. Donald Trump has figured out that ICE is the way to go if you want to exercise these kind of repressive and violent tactics and these kind of intimidating tactics that are all designed to build up people, not in Minneapolis, but around the country, watching what happened in Minneapolis. As much as they admire, millions of us admire what people were doing on the streets in resistance in Minneapolis, people also are looking at what happened in Minneapolis and saw two execution-style murders on the streets of Minneapolis. And there are going to be people around the country who are going to be left with a residue of fear because of what they saw on the part of the government in Minneapolis. And so I think, this just is to amplify Miles's point. None of these things should be taken in isolation. We have to be able to look at them as a continuum, as an escalation, and we have to look at what the end game is. And the end game, I think, is not just an end game that has to do with the deportation agenda. I think the end game has to do with the elections in November.
Senator, I saw you nodding every time the elections in November came up. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is on New Year's Eve, 2025, the Department of Homeland Security sent out a public statement basically saying they want to achieve 100 million deportations. That is a third of the population in the United States of America. There are not 100 million immigrants in this country. And we have seen in Minnesota that they are targeting Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous people through terrorizing, harassment, detainment, detention, deportation. They have deported U.S. citizens. And Trump has said he wants to deport U.S. citizens. And so we absolutely should see Minnesota as the test case for how they want to achieve their stated goal, which is to remove 1/3 of the population from this country, Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous. This was their first chance to show people what they wanted to do. They see that people don't like it, so they're going to look for a different way. But they are not acting like people who want to win elections. They're acting like people who have a plan to not have free and fair elections. And we've seen what they've done in Georgia. We've seen the cases that they filed. We've seen the attempts at the Supreme Court. We should be all on high alert for what they are planning in November, because that has come through very, very loud and clear in the last, year, but certainly in the last month or so.
Yeah, I mean, Miles, J.P. Cooley, who was Jack Smith's deputy on both the documents case and the January 6th case, said that the conduct that Donald Trump is engaged in now is the same conduct he was indicted for his activity after the 2020 election.
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuation of a criminal conspiracy. That's how you've got to look at it. I mean, when the news broke in Fulton County, for instance, a lot of people were taking the administration's bait and saying, well, the DNI was there. They are saying that there's some kind of foreign interference. They were creating this story and a little bit of mystery around that foreign interference. No, this is very clear what it was. Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office in an interview with Tom Yamas at NBC News and said, well, those FBI agents are going to find out who really won the 2020 election. I doubt his team wanted him to say that, but as always, Donald Trump let the secret slip. Whatever his team says their intentions were, it seems like the president of the United States wanted to conduct an illegal recount at the hands of federal agents, which again would violate the United States Constitution. The federal government is not responsible for doing something like that. And certainly the president can't unilaterally do that. But that seems to be what is happening here. And I think that spells danger for other states around this country. And I don't just think that. The president has said he's looking at California and other states. They are normalizing these other very obvious violations of states' rights, like we saw in Minnesota, like we've now seen in Georgia. They are going on the warpath of those violations because the president is terrified of losing this election. So I would say, in addition to immigration, on elections, states need to stay frosty. They need to have their lawsuits ready, because what happened in Fulton County is very likely to happen to others.
All right, no one's going anywhere. So much for sleeping soundly tonight. Still ahead for us, widespread condemnation from the left and now some on the right, too. That's how bad it was, of Pam Bondi and the Justice Department's commitment to protecting the so-called Epstein class. We'll show that to you. Plus, holding the line, Donald Trump's efforts to punish his so-called political enemies continues to get stopped by grand juries and judges. We'll show you what that looks like. And later in the broadcast, Professor Scott Galloway on how to stop Donald Trump the way it hurts the most. We'll get to all that and much more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Obviously, there's progress in that they are leaving right now, but as far as some deal that was struck to get them out, the answer is no. I think what you saw is you saw a federal government and an administration that thought that they were going to break the people of Minneapolis down. They thought that we were going to back down and sort of kowtow to whatever it is that they were looking to get done, not just locally in Minneapolis, but nationwide. They were looking to implement a national agenda based on coercing us to change local policy. And here's the thing. We didn't. The people of Minneapolis stood up. They stood up for their neighbors. They loved on each other. And I think that's the kind of patriotism that is ultimately going to get us through this.
That was Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey speaking to my colleague Chris Hayes. You can catch the entire interview tonight at 8 o'clock on All In. We are back with the Senator, Miles and John. John Heilemann, I want to come to you on this, what the country has seen out of the leaders of Minneapolis. And I'm coming to you instead of the Senator because I don't want to make her uncomfortable. But there is something different in how Minneapolis and Minnesota have dealt with Donald Trump. And there is some pattern for people like you and me who have been covering Donald Trump for 10 years. When people fight back, he just moves on. I mean, he doesn't really, he really does gravitate toward the low-hanging fruit. And when people stand up to him, it's not that he likes it or hates it. He just moves on. What is your sense of sort of the lesson in Donald Trump that Minnesota has taught the country?
Well, I think to prioritize these things importantly, this is the thing I'm about to say is something that Minneapolis has in common with other places, but it's really important for everybody else to always think about, which is, and the leaders in Minneapolis and in Minnesota have made this really clear. Nonviolence, crucial. They are trying to provoke violent responses in these places, and if you give them violence, that will only escalate things. It will only lead to more bloodshed, and it will also give them the upper hand politically, because that's what they want to make people think, that all these people in these places that are exercising, that are fighting back, are instigators and are anti-American and so on. So that's the first thing. And you heard Mayor Frey there with Chris Hayes talking about a definition of patriotism that is built around love and nonviolence and not the opposite. But the thing you're talking about, Nicole, is something that we've seen in many, many occasions in many, many forums over the course of the last year. And it's a very familiar phrase to you and to all of our panel today. It's taco. It's another version of the taco thing. You saw it on Greenland. You saw it on tariffs after Liberation Day. In those cases, in Jerome Powell, in those cases, you saw it from the market. The market stood up to Donald Trump, and he tacoed. He chickened out. He moved on to the next thing. Well, I can't say how obvious a lesson this is to anybody who's ever been on a schoolyard, but to all these big media companies who decided to capitulate, what's the lesson? The lesson is if you give the schoolyard bully your lunch, he doesn't walk away and say thank you for lunch. He comes back the next day and says, please give me dinner, and also give me your allowance, and also give me your car keys, and also give me whatever else that he wants to. That doesn't make him capitulating, bowing and scraping before Donald Trump gets you nothing but more abuse. And standing up to Donald Trump gets you taco. You get Trump who says, he is not fully insensate to political stimulus. And so it's like, if you stand up to him and your cause is righteous and you stand up in the right way, he will back down. None of that undercuts the points that we've all been making here about the long-term threats that he poses and how this fight isn't over and how he's not moving on in the grand macro sense. He's going to keep trying to probe for weaknesses and trying to get done what he wants to get done. But in the moment, when he comes to your doorstep, when the bully shows up, the right thing to do is not hand him your lunch money, but to kick him in the nuts.
Senator, you're welcome to pick up on John's point, or I'll give you another entry point if you like. What is the rebuilding, and when can it start?
Yeah. I'll take both the end of the last one, and then I'll take the new entry point. Okay. Probably not the kick in the nuts part. I think what makes the leaders of Minnesota special is the people of Minnesota. But if every leader that you see before you on TV at a press conference, behind them are tens of thousands of Minnesota hockey moms with minivans and whistles, daycare dads with pickup trucks delivering groceries, imams, pastors, rabbis with unwavering faith, labor leaders with iPhones. These are the people of Minnesota, and they are the ones who are showing up through their leaders all the time. They are just leaders are reflecting what is on the ground. I cannot overstate how deeply organized we are and how hyper-locally we are organized, and it is just spread across the state. And that's what you're seeing in the leaders, is the people of Minnesota. What comes next, I will say, we want ICE out of Minnesota, and that has not happened yet. Regardless of what has been said at a press conference, it's not ended. We want our neighbors back. There are 3,000 of our neighbors that are missing, that have been disappeared, that have been sent to concentration camps in other states. We want them back. We want the children back. We want our neighbors back. And then we need accountability, because it's not just the executions of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. There have been thousands of people who have been terrorized, detained for no reason, their homes broken into, their cars crashed into. They've arrested journalists, both national and independent journalists in Minnesota. There is a lot of accountability that needs to happen with Secretary Noem, of course, but every person underneath her who executed this lawless surge. That needs to happen as well. And then we need repair. We've talked about the economic devastation, yes, but the children of Minnesota, like half of the kids in some of these districts aren't going to school right now because they're too afraid to leave their house. Small businesses are just crumbling under this surge. We need real repair. And that doesn't even begin to mention the restoration of the funding that they've already cut off from the state of Minnesota. So that is what repair will look like. And this has been like a natural disaster, but it was created by Trump and Republicans. We need that level of response.
Yeah, I mean, Miles, that's the through line, right? Trump is a disaster created by Trump.
He absolutely is. And I take that point on repair. And that's the optimistic fatalism you and I have talked about for years, Nicole, is at the risk of getting too philosophical. Nature destroys everything it creates, but it also creates from everything it destroys. It's been a very dark year. We probably have a few more very dark years. But on the back end of this, we have the opportunity to do some very serious civic rebuilding. And we don't have to wait until 3 years from now. Right now, the states are lighting the way for us. I mean, Minnesota nice has become something like Minnesota no nonsense, or maybe it's better to say Minnesota no surrender. And that attitude and that demeanor is going to be what we need to take into the rebuilding. And that's going to be not just hoping we can revert back to 2014 and the world is going to be that way and we're going to have strong inspector generals at agencies that will prevent these things from happening. We need some big reforms, but now is the moment to have those conversations. Just like we talked about the other week, we need a full overhaul of the Department of Homeland Security, and everything we've seen from Donald Trump shows us exactly why.
Yeah, I hear that increasingly from folks like Ian Basson and Sue Gordon, and it's about rebuilding something more durable, something different. State Senator Erin Maye Quade, it's a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you so much for starting us off. Miles Taylor, thank you for starting us off. John Howman sticks around for the hour after the break. For us, Pam Bondi yesterday tried and failed to deflect and dismiss how accountability is still very much what all Americans want when it comes to the heinous and disgusting crimes committed by child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. And there's some devastating new poll numbers that reflect that back to us. We'll show them to you next.